Hey, you! Yeah, you right there. Have you ever stopped and wondered, how the heck does money even get made? I mean, wouldn't it be nice if the government could just crank up a printer, spit out some cash, and boom, we're all rolling in yachts and Lambos? Sounds like a dream, right? But hold up, that's not how it works. If it were that easy, we'd all be filthy rich by now. But don't worry, I got you. Let's break this down and uncover the truth about how money printing actually works. Section 1. What is money printing? Okay, first things first, money printing doesn't mean physically printing cash. Shocker, right? It's a term people use to describe increasing the money supply in the economy. When central banks like the Federal Reserve want to add money to the economy, they use some fancy word. The most famous one? Quantitative easing, or QE. Sounds like a vitamin supplement, but nah. It's basically the Fed's way of pumping money into the system. Section 2. What does quantitative easing mean? All right. Here's how QE really works. The central bank doesn't just start printing stacks of cash like a money factory. Instead, they create digital money. You know, like when you check your bank account and see numbers instead of actual cash piles. Now, when the government needs money, they don't just ask nicely. They issue bonds. Think of it like the government saying, "Hey, lend me some cash now, and I'll pay you back later." Banks and investors jump on these, hoping to cash in later. But here's the twist. The central bank steps in later like a big spender, buying those bonds from banks or financial institutions using freshly created digital money. And guess what? These government bonds are basically fancy IOUs, just a fancy way of saying, we'll pay you back someday. Let's make this even simpler. You're out with a friend, craving a snack, but your wallet's emptier than your fridge before payday. So you turn to your buddy and say, "Hey, can I borrow $10? I'll pay you back next week. Promise." Now, instead of handing over actual cash, you scribble on a napkin, "I owe you $10, totally legit, don't worry." Your friend squints at it, raises an eyebrow, and goes, this is just a piece of paper." And you, with the confidence of a used car salesman, reply, No, it's as good as money. I promise I'll pay you back." Boom. That napkin, that's an IOU. Not real money, just a promise to pay later. Now imagine replacing you with the government and your friend with a bank. Congratulations, you just understood how government bonds work. Section 3. Where does the money go? Alright, so now the bank has more cash. Cool, right? But what do they do with it? Ideally, they lend it out to businesses, to people, to that one guy who swears he's going to start the next big thing. This extra cash flowing through the economy is supposed to boost spending, fuel investments, and drive growth. In theory, at least. Because, banks could also just sit on it, pump up the stock market, or give themselves bigger bonuses. But hey, that's a story for another time. But wait, doesn't printing more money lead to inflation? Yes, it can. If there's too much money chasing too few goods. And when that happens, prices go nuts. Think of it like this, a pizza party. But there's only one slice left, and 10 hungry people staring it down. At first, someone offers $5, then another guy shoves him aside. "Bro, I'll give you $20. Next thing you know, $50, $100. And just like that, pizza is now a luxury item. That, my friends, is inflation in action. But inflation isn't even the worst-case scenario. Oh no. Welcome to hyperinflation. This is when prices spiral out of control and money loses its value faster than you can even spend it. Let's talk history. Germany, 1920s. After World War I, they printed so much money that the German mark became worthless. People were literally burning cash because it was cheaper than buying wood. Then there's Zimbabwe in the 2000s. Inflation hit. Get ready for this. 89.7 sextillion %. Yep, that's a real number. And more recently, Venezuela. Inflation got so bad that people stopped counting cash and started weighing it instead. The lesson? Printing money like there's no tomorrow without balancing supply and demand is like lighting your economy on fire. And let's be real, that's not a great strategy. So central banks have to balance things carefully. They want to boost the economy, but not create runaway inflation. Imagine walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. Yeah, it's that risky. Let's look at a real-world example, the the 2008 financial crisis. The Fed used quantitative easing to pump trillions into the economy. It helped stabilize things, but it wasn't some magic fix. Some say it blew up asset bubbles, like the stock market soaring to crazy heights. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic. This time, governments didn't just pump money into banks. They sent direct stimulus checks straight to people. What could possibly go wrong? Well, too much money. Too fast. And you guessed it, inflation. The total economic COVID relief? A massive $5.2 trillion. That's about 25% of the entire U.S. economy. To put that in perspective, $5.2 trillion is the total cost of all U.S. wars since 2001. It's even more expensive than World War II, the costliest war in history. A lot of people think this money came from our past tax payments. But here's the truth. The government didn't just use old tax dollars, it created new money. This is future tax dollars being spent today. Out of that $5.2 trillion, about $1 trillion went directly to taxpayers as relief checks. The other $4.2 trillion? It funded vaccines, unemployment, and a whole list of other programs. So far, people have welcomed this relief. And let's be real, during a crisis, that money was a lifeline. But there's a big concern. What happens to the US dollar? Inflation. That's what happens when too many dollars are chasing too few goods. And this is a real possibility. Normally, the money supply grows around 7% per year. But with quantitative easing, that rate has doubled to 14% per year over the past decade. Now, the COVID relief floodgates have blasted open. That $5 trillion just jumped the money supply by 27%, almost overnight. So the big question is, what happens next? Take a good look at this chart. Since 2020, the U.S. has printed nearly 80% of all U.S. dollars currently in circulation. 80%. That means almost every dollar in your pocket was created in just the last few years. And now, we're paying the price. Inflation, rising costs, a dollar that just doesn't stretch as far. This isn't just numbers on a chart, this is reality. Section 4. How do we survive in this economy? Let's be real for a second. The government says CPI inflation in 2024 is just 2.9%. But, come on, does it feel like 2.9% when you go to the grocery store? When you buy milk? Eggs? When you try to buy a house? Hell no. The real inflation rate. It's not some sugar-coated government number. I believe it's the actual rate at which money supply is increasing. So how do we beat inflation? You don't just save money. You buy assets that increase in value. But which assets? Most so-called gurus will tell you to work hard, live below your means, save, and invest in index funds or mutual funds. Sounds good, right? Well, let's see how that plays out. You work your butt off for 40 years. You save diligently. You invest in the S&P 500. And after 40 years, your net worth grows from $50,000 to $2 million. But guess what? You don't feel rich. Your quality of life actually went down. So why didn't it work? Let me show you. This is the chart of the S&P 500 versus global liquidity. Global liquidity equals the total amount of money created in the world. And what do we see? As the money supply grows, the S&P 500 goes up at the same rate. Translation? Your $2 million on paper? After adjusting for inflation, it might only be worth $50,000 in today's money. And that's not even counting the fees you pay to your advisor or your fund manager. So in the end, they get paid. You get what's left. This is why the system doesn't work. You can't escape the game. No matter what, you're in it. So instead of being a victim, why not learn to be a better player? This is where we dive into the investing game black hole. Let's look at all major asset returns from 2011 to 2024. First, here's the U.S. money supply growth rate, 16.2% per year. So if your investments aren't beating that, you're losing. Now, what's at the top of the list? Number 1, Bitcoin. It has an insane annualized return of 147%. Bitcoin has been the best performing asset of the last decade. If you bought Bitcoin, you got ahead. Next, at number 2, the Nasdaq. This includes the top tech stocks like Apple, Nvidia, and Tesla with a return of 18.4%. That's about 2 to 3% above US money supply growth. So with this, you're barely keeping your head above water, enough to survive, but not to win. Now let's look at number 4, the S&P 500. This is where most financial advisors tell you to invest. And what's the return? 13.7%? So is that beating real inflation? No, it's not. Everything else? Even worse. Look at gold, just 4.1% average return. That's way below inflation. So what does this tell us? Only 2 asset classes have consistently outperformed inflation. If you want to survive and get ahead, you need to choose wisely. So that's how money printing really works. It's not just some magical printing press spitting out cash like a broken ATM. It's a messy mix of digital money creation, debt buying, and a whole lot of economic guesswork. And let's be real, balancing this is hard. Every decision the government makes sends shockwaves through the economy that we won't fully feel for years. By then, we'll all be looking at our grocery bills wondering, when did chicken become a luxury item? Appreciate you watching. If you want to stay ahead in this economy, smash that subscribe button like it's inflating your rent, and I'll catch you in the next one.